An Untraveled Road by Nyan Zangetsu, Chapter 6, Hope of Morning. Men are weak, divide them, place doubt in their minds, and any semblance of power they once had will wash away. But hope is a powerful thing. It drives, inspires us, gives us strength to carry on. That young man is hope. He won't be bent, he won't be broken. No, I think him your champion. Everyone has a weakness. It's merely a matter of finding the right leverage. Everyone has a limit, a breaking point. I'll find his soon enough. A meeting of friends. Hope of morning. Morning brought its own set of problems. Waking up wasn't a problem for Naruto. With a weekend remnant under his belt, he's become something of an early riser through sheer bloody habit. Willow liked to get up at an early hour, and seeing as the rooms were connected, that meant he often rose around the same time. These days, his internal clock wouldn't allow him to sleep past 8. He didn't necessarily like getting up this early, mind you, but after spending time with Willow, he'd come to appreciate the necessity of it. What was that saying she was always going on about? Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Yeah, that was the one. She was right in a sense. Those words had clearly worked wonders for Nicholas Schnee. Rare was the day she slept in, though it had been known to happen on occasion, and when she rose, he usually rose with her. Even after all the chaos yesterday, he still couldn't bring himself to sleep past sunrise. That was a joke to there was a joke to me there. Fortunately, he wasn't aware enough to make it. Ugh. That was a weird dream. He'd seen a strange dream. He's seen a strange dream, but he remembered precious little of it. Fire and ash, an angry girl scratching at his face as he carried her to safety, followed by a captain carrying him. Or was it Ironsides, Ironwing? No, Ironwood. That was it. The name slotted into place somewhere in the back of his mind, causing him to shake his head as he rose. Why did he know that name? He'd never heard it before, had he? Meh, it was probably just that, a dream, nothing important. People dreamed all the time, didn't they? Blue eyes blinked away the cobwebs of sleep and reluctantly creaked open to meet the world. Squinted and widened when a small sigh whispered against his ear. His entire body locked up. It was only his better judgment and Kurama's silence that prevented Naruto from crying out and playing around like a fool. He knew his bedroom like the back of his hand, and while he wasn't paranoid enough to booby trap it as of yet, he knew at once that something had gone terribly, horribly wrong, because he wasn't alone. It took a fair bit of surprise it took a fair bit to surprise Naruto when he woke up these days. There was still that occasional moment of panic when he failed to recognize the ceiling above him as that of his old apartment back home. But he had since learned to suppress that instinct. He'd conducted his usual morning business, brush his teeth, train for a bit, grab some breakfast with Willow, then see what they held for them. There wasn't really a set schedule beyond that, and he had admittedly lowered his guard because of it. Today, when he woke to find a body tucked into his chest, well, there was panic to be had amply. Taking great care and not daring to look down, Naruto cast a glance for his surroundings. Little more than a large chamber clad in Schnee colors, his quarters were a decidedly Spartan space, one he hadn't bothered to decorate it yet. Its sole feature was the fact that it served as two rooms in one, joined by a single locked door between them. Oh, and the warm body nestled against him. No use putting it off any longer, he supposed, steeling himself the way which Shinobi finally looked down. To his relief and an odd pang of disappointment, it wasn't Willow nestled against him. Stubborn little tyke. Kurama yawned. Why did she get when did she get there? For it was Cinder sleeping soundly against him, little fingers fizzling fiercely against his pale navy nightshirt. Blue eyes fluttered shut and opened again in surprise. Once, twice, thrice. She hadn't been there when he'd gone to sleep. He hadn't truly woken in the night because she wasn't a threat. Rather, she hadn't meant him any harm. He almost went back to sleep, but for a single stray thought. Wait. She was supposed to be sleeping with Willow. Granted, they had connecting rooms, but there was a door between them with a lock. Even in his sleep, he should have sensed her. She's a street rat. His partner scoffed. Of course she'd know how to pick a lock. Cinder whimpered softly in her sleep then. Then it was such a tiny and pitiful sound, little more than a squeak, but it broke Naruto's heart all the same. She looked thin under that shirt. too thin. Her cheeks weren't quite sunken, but she looked gaunt all the same. Last night and a hearty meal had done wonders for her constitution, yet there could be no denying her weakness. How long had she been alone? What kind of monsters abandoned a little girl like this? He'd seen the mess that was Mantle. It was a miracle she'd lasted this long. Just the thought made his blood boil. If he ever met her so-called parents, he'd give them an earful and a thrashing besides. Even now, his parental instincts, didn't know I had those, flared up in full force. Precious child must protect. Daw, look at daddy's little girl. Bite me, Kurma, he shot back. I regret nothing. A small, rueful smile tugged at his lips as Cinder murmured something and rolled over. Impulsively, he reached out and pulled the sheets around her shoulders. Really, adopting a kid. What the devil had he been thinking? He wasn't at the time, and he didn't regret his decision for a moment, but this was all new to him. So fresh. It helped that she was just that, a child, and not a mewling infant, but he still found himself at something of a loss. He knew what not to do, of course. His formative years were proof enough of that, but beyond that, he felt woefully out of his depth here. He'd have to ask Nicholas and Willow for advice. Not Summer. Definitely not Summer. While she slumbered, Naruto took the opportunity to retrieve the shinobi prosthetic from its case and reattach it to his stump. Watts really was a man of his word. Not only did it still fit like a glove, but there wasn't so much as a nick of discomfort. He wasn't quite used to it, and it would take some time to truly master the vast array of weapons it produced. But he was content with it. He thought there would be a weight of some sort, that he'd be left unbalanced, but really he barely even noticed it at all. So he heard Kurama yawn in his mind. What do you think? I think we should get him a gift basket, or 10. He hummed aloud, flexing his metal finger into a loose fist as he sat back on the bed. Maybe I'll do that today. He still needs to install that grappling hook. No, 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 don't go! Without warning, Zinder shouted, causing him to jump. Why are you leaving me here? What? I'm not leaving. Naruto turned his head, and the protest died on his lips as he found his ward asleep. His little face screwed up in pain, closed eyes scrunching tightly against some unseen eldritch horror. She pivoted her body with impressive dexterity and all but clung to him for shelter. It was only then that he realized she was having a bad dream. No, a nightmare by the looks of things. The mark on his palm began to tingle unpleasantly for reasons he didn't understand. Was that a bad thing? He wondered at it for a moment, then shrugged it off. Hey, he tried jostling his charge. It's okay. Wake up. Somehow, that only made things worse. So much worse. I'm sorry. Instead of waking, Cinder curled inward against him, as though trying to shield herself from an attack of some sort. I'll be good, please. Don't leave. Those parental instincts he'd mentioned of a few moments ago. Yeah, they were a full-blown inferno now. Brat, Kurma growled. Naruto felt a muscle jump in his jaw. Whoever did this to her needs to die, painfully. Naruto usually wasn't the sort to advocate for violence, but seeing this, it hardened something in his soul. Agreed. With infinite care, the wayward shinobi hunched down, settled his arms around Cinder's frail form, and began to rock the girl back and forth as best he could, which is to say, it was a slow, awkward thing. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing, and it showed from the first. But he still made the attempt. For her part, Cinder fought like a wildcat in his grasp, unaware that he was trying to help her. Though she be but little, she was fierce, and she'd live all her life on the streets. Here, now, in this moment, it showed. She all but tore into him. Stop! She wailed. Let go! No doubt imagining him to be a part of her nightmare, she clawed and scratched at his chest in a frantic attempt to escape. Her semblance flared in response to her panic, pulling tiny wisps of smoke from his shirt as her feline hands fought him. Naruto bored all in stoic silence, knowing she meant none of it. Eventually, he gave up rocking her altogether and simply held her close. When that didn't calm her, he tried talking to her. You're all right, he murmured. I'm not going to hurt you. A gasp tore itself out of him when she bit his chest, but he held fast. No one's going to hurt you ever again, I promise. Just let it all out. This time, Cinder's whimper sounded like a sob, but gradually her struggles began to abate as she spoke as he spoke to her. Slowly but surely, whatever was tormenting the poor girl let her be. Naruto didn't dare release her until they ceased entirely, for fear of her flying out of control again. Once he was wholly certain she'd escaped whatever was tormenting her slumber, he extracted himself from her arms and, with great care, slipped down and out of the bed. He risked a glance over his shoulder just to be certain she was still asleep. She didn't move. Then, and only then, did he dare to creep forward. His stomach growled as he did. Maybe he should raid the kitchen, bring back a bit of breakfast to surprise Cinder. She might like that. Pancakes, maybe. Yeah, everybody likes pancakes. That sounds great. The floorboard creaked treacherously under his bare foot, and he swore softly. Shh! Where are you going? A yawn greeted him not a breath later. Naruto faltered mid-step and narrowly caught himself on a wall. No, there was just no way Cinder was awake after that ordeal. He barely moved, and that stray squeaky board hadn't been that loud. Just how light a sleeper was she? Sure enough, when he turned around, he found a familiar pair of amber eyes gazing up at him. Red puffy eyes. She'd been crying in her sleep. It made a strange sort of sense. Now that he thought about it, she'd lived all her life on the streets. Small wonder she woke so easily. Unfortunately, that left him with a very frightened and very much awake child that he had no idea what to do with. Did I do something wrong? Her voice warbled with a faint note of panic. When he wasn't quite quick enough to answer, she sat up a little straighter and clasped her hands. I'll do better, she babbled, the words rushing to get them out. I'll be good. Instinct seized Naruto all at once, and he bolted back to her. In hindsight, he wasn't really sure what compelled him to move as quickly as he did. Call it a sixth sense of sorts. He had the strangest feelings that if he'd left Cinder alone now, something awful would happen down the line, and it would be all his fault. He was having none of that. Bending a knee, he tucked her thin body against his chest and held her close. Hey, hey, he soothed, stroking the back of her head as gently as he could, lest she bolt. It's all right, kiddo. I was just going to get you some food. I'm not going anywhere. Well, he amended with a wry chuckle when she sniffed into his chest. Not without telling you first. Promise? She smiled. She lifted her head to gaze back at him with deep golden eyes. Some might have thought it an act, yet his enhanced senses told him otherwise. Even now, Cinder radiated fear and hurt and pain. Yet beneath it all, he glimpsed a tiny ember of hope. A small part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in what he was saying. Once more, he saw himself in her. As a child, his life could have been so much worse than it was. Granted, he'd been a bit of a social pariah at first, with few friends, nothing to his name, but he'd been spared the true horrors of a life in the streets. Cinder wasn't so lucky. Sure thing. Cross my heart and hope to die. He beamed back at her. She blinked at him in turn. Why would you want to die? That's not what I... Never mind. Naruto was beginning to think his newfound daughter was a very literal child. He supposed that was to be expected given the less than fortunate circumstances of her upbringing. She had even less than him as a child. Back then, he had a roof over his head and a stipend from the Hokage to keep him fed. Cinder had no such safety net, right? Surely this couldn't be that hard. He just had to keep her fed, clothed, and happy. Basic human needs, right? He could do that. And if anyone tried to hurt her again, well, he'd just have to break their kneecaps. Oh, someone's protective. All my hate karma, he growled inwardly at his partner. You have it. Cinder's small hand tugged at his sleeve, bringing him back to reality. When can we train? Now it was Naruto's turn to blink. You said we could. You said you would train me. Now that Cinder knew she was safe and her position secure, no child would ever think like that. No child should ever think like that. She jutted her chin out at him in childish defiance. I'm awake. You're awake. What are we waiting for? So small, proud, fragile. Naruto's heart lurched all over again. And so I did. He hummed, musing her hair with his true hand. Let's get some breakfast first. You're probably hungry. Cinder looked like she wanted to protest, but her stomach chose that moment to growl plaintively. She glowered at it as though it had betrayed her. Perhaps she thought so. In the end, she relented with a frown and a nod, but still her golden eyes burned. And then training. Fierce little thing. You bet, he said. First we eat, then we train. Good. Her head bobbed, and that brief flicker of vulnerability vanished behind her facade once more. I need to get stronger. Naruto frowned throughout his curiosity piqued by her words. Why is that now? Because she clambered into his lap and fixed him with a flat look. The powerful are untouchable. Nobody can hurt them. Her fingers curled angrily against the bedsheets, creating thin whiffs of smoke as her semblance briefly flared. No one can tell them what to do. I want that. No, that's not it. This time, there could be no denying the hunger in her eyes when she looked at him, the burning need to be more than what she was now. I need that. I never want to be weak again. Well, that wasn't ominous at all. All right, little Miss Spitfire. Naruto swore softly. I'm thinking we should set some ground rules first. Wouldn't want you to go and become an Avenger when Willow and I aren't looking. What's an Avenger? The mark on Naruto's hand pulsed painfully, drawing a grimace from him. Something you don't want to be. Trust me. Fine. I'll listen to you. Cinder scowled and adopted a pose not unlike one he'd seen Willow use. No doubt she meant to sound and look imposing, but it emerged as a whine. It also stirred a less than pleasant thought in the back of Naruto's mind. Something had caused that nightmare. Someone. His temper sparked just thinking about it. He wanted details. What kind of monster threw their own daughter into the streets and left them to fend for themselves? And so he ventured the unspoken question. That was quite the nightmare you had. You all right? Cinder stiffened, only just now noticing his ruined shirt, but she didn't speak. Naruto took the chance to press the advantage and asked the burning question. About your parents? What about them? Her eyes darkened dangerously. They lied to me. They left me. I hate them. I hope they're dead. They did. And you probably do. His head bobbed in agreement as she leaned back against his chest. I can't say why they did that to you, she hummed softly as he began to stroke her hair. I didn't know them, but that is, say, me and Willow, won't leave you. He patted her head once for emphasis. We're on your side. We'll never betray you. I want you to know that. He wasn't all surprised when she held out her hand, one finger curled before them. Pinky promise? Now. But he was amused, very much so. Naruto's mouth twitched. In that moment was all he could do not to laugh. His shoulders visibly vibrated as he fought down a snicker. He mustn't chuckle. Not here. Not now. Not even a little. She tried so hard to act like a grown woman, when in reality she was little more than a child. Her true nature tended to shine through more often than she thought. He could have teased her about it, told her to act her age, any number of things. Instead, he curled his finger around hers. Pinky promise. Now then, his words drew a small shy smile from her. What say we? She ran away! Before he could hope to speak further on the matter, the door to Willow's room burst open with a mighty shout, and the thunderous crash caused them both to jump. Not a heartbeat later, the Schnee herself swept through, clad in little more than her nightgown and little else. Naruto felt his throat go dry. He'd never seen her exposed like this. He'd never seen her exposed like this. Did her no justice. Even with blearing eyes and hair tousled from sleep, she was a beauty to behold. Her gown did precious little to conceal her undergarments, or the pale skin and glowing curves beneath, nor the slender expanse of her long legs. It was a veritable feast for the eyes, and his eyes wanted nothing more than to drink their fill. No bad eyes. He shook his head and wrenched his gaze away. Treason! Treachery! Arctic orb swept over him. Thankfully, she found Cinder in his lap, and the concern in her gaze melted like so much ice. So this is where you were. She frowned, planted one hand on a hip. It did interesting things to her gown. You were supposed to stay in my room. Papa's stronger than you. Cinder leaned back against his chest and spoke with the absolute certainty that only a child could possibly possess. I feel safer here. Naruto wheezed. Papa. Just hearing it again made him weak. By comparison, Willow's reaction proved more muted. Is he now? The hairs arched the pale brow at him. Well, we'll just have to test that in the yard, won't we? Yes, please. Cinder perked up. Oh dear, that much had already been planned, but for some reason he had a bad feeling about it now. Willow could tolerate many things, but she loathed being called weak. Cinder had all but called her out just now, and his silence didn't help matters any. Then there was the elephant in the room. Naruto sighed. Before that, we have a problem. What? Willow frowned at him. What wrong with you? Not me. You. He gestured at her state of undress. Maybe you should put on some clothes. Willow's eyes flashed right, then left, and finally down. She saw a spark of comprehension dawn in her eyes. What do you? Oh, oh! In that very moment, Willow's mind finally caught up with her mouth. She realized where she was standing, what she was wearing, who was watching. Her lips parted, mouth hanging open to form a small, perfect oval. As her eyes widened spectacularly, a deep cherry red flush crept up the back of her neck and crawled across her pale visage. She started to sputter in quiet concentration, and Naruto tensed, sensing the inevitable explosion that was to come. No, not an explosion, an avalanche. Willow looked like she was about to panic, snatch up every pillow in the room with her glyphs, and bury him with them. A week ago, Naruto could have ducked and taken it like a louse. Now, his mind knew better. Words spilled from his lips before he could think to hold them back. Why are you getting all flustered for? He thought he said. You look good. Shit, he hadn't meant to say that out loud. Still, it saved him. It was like flicking a switch. Whatever anger Willow had managed to muster guttered out all at once, and the moment she heard those words, she went terribly still, and her blush deepened, a fresh surge of heat flooding her cheeks to turn them a bright shade of pink. Her back arched, and with every fiber of his being, Naruto willed himself to meet her eyes and not look elsewhere. To do so now meant death. Of that much he was certain. Blind, bloody luck had given him an out this time, and he was determined to take it. Really? As he looked on, his female fiancée touched a hand to her face and looked away, mumbling something to herself as she draped her right arm around her waist. Well, I suppose it can't be helped. I did barge in on you, and it's not as if you're at fault for that since you have appearance to maintain, and oh god, you could grind me on those. Her eyes drifted lower to his open shirt, and the rest of her words dissolved into gibberish. Now it was Naruto's turn to blush. When her gaze finally rose back to his, he wasn't prepared for the slightly glazed look of found lurking there. Hunger. Naruto didn't know how to respond to that, or even if he should. The moment stretched out, and then Cinder pushed herself between them. Food, now, please. Willow made angry willow noises. Summer met them in the hall with a sunny smile. Good morning. Willow and Naruto returned the greeting, but Cinder buried her head deeper into his back and clung onto the latter's shoulders for dear life. Even then, she still felt Summer's keen eyes watching. Maybe if she pretended to be asleep, this silver-eyed demon would take the hint and leave her be. Surely the cloaked huntress wouldn't be that dense. No such luck. And how did the little cutie sleep? Soundly. Naruto replied. Why was he lying for her? She snuck into my bed, though. Really? She could see the huntress's face, but she heard Summer squeal all the same. That's just precious. Was it? Cinder didn't see why. On the streets you had to ally yourself with the strongest person you could. You lived or died depending on the alliance you forged. Here, that was Naruto. She didn't dislike Willow per se, but the whiskered man seemed to be the greater of the two powers here, and besides, saying she'd had a bad dream was tantamount to admitting weakness. Naruto hadn't done that. Instead, he covered for her just now, further deepening her debt to him. Was that his intention, or did he have something else in mind? She's also starving, so cut her some slack. Well, there went the goodwill. Traitor! Cinder's head snapped up with a growl before she could think to hold herself back. I am not. Don't lie. An impish sparkle flitted through those ocean blue eyes as she glowered at him. You're growing girl. You growling girl. You gotta eat. Her stomach growled in agreement like so much thunder, and her eyes narrowed to hooded slits of molded golden. Treachery, traitors, everyone. Willow's bemused smile struck a chord with her. He's always like this. You get used to it. Cinder butted the back of his head with her head, eliciting a grunt from her ride. Summer giggled. I wish I had a little sister. No, you don't. Cinder stole a glance at the rest of her patron, Papa, when he wasn't looking, sneaking a peek at his broad back. Today he'd eschewed the traditional atlas/knee colors in favor of something brighter, instead opting for a loose fitting scarlet jacket thrown over a dark navy tee with matching trousers. Cinder was rather inclined towards the color red herself. She very much approved. It was decidedly casual wear, all things considered, but her keen ears caught the soft clink of metal when he moved. He probably had a few tricks up his sleeves, quite literally. She had yet to see what he could truly do with that prosthetic, but she suspected she'd find out soon. It also begged another question, as evidenced by his mental limb. Naruto had clearly lost an arm in battle at some point, be it someone or Something. What kind of monster could wound him like that? Had it been a grim or a human? Something of a higher power? She wasn't sure. She wanted to find out. Just the thought of it made her shudder. Thankfully, a more pleasant memory chased that darkness away. We won't leave you. Cinder slammed her head into Naruto's back to hide her now rosy cheeks and incoherent thoughts. Parents. She had them again. A family. She wanted to believe their words. Badly. So very badly. And a single night Naruto and Willow had given her fresh clothes, a bath. Blah, and more food than she ever thought possible. At first, she thought it all some fever dream of some sort, one she'd wake from at any moment. Instead, she'd woken to warm sheets and a promise of safety. She'd always believed in destiny. Now it seemed destiny had found her. Seemingly overnight, she'd gone from miserable street rat to ward and daughter to the most powerful family in Atlas. And then there was the matter of her other benefactor. Her gaze strayed to Willow. For a moment back there in the bedroom, she'd glimpsed the look in her eyes, the one she knew all too well, lust, just a little, just a hint. But Schnee had looked all a moment from jumping him before she intervened back there. Cinder wasn't sure why she'd done so, nor how to feel about that. Thankfully, everyone was dressed now, and any such thoughts were well and truly buried for the time being. It gave her time to focus on more important matters, food and training. When she woke up, mornings are evil. She soaked against Naruto like the child she was. We should ban them. Come now, don't be cross, Willow hummed. It'll be past dawn and seconded. Summer happily jumped in. Third, Naruto cried. His laugh almost wrung a smile from Cinder. How could he smile that easily? Did nothing bother him? Did he think himself invincible? His back was certainly strong enough, warm, and his arms firm as he cradled her. She knew they'd got down. She knew they did not drop her unless she asked. Perhaps not even then. She liked that. Maybe she could believe him. He was blunt and honest, and never said anything he didn't mean. When he spoke, people listened and hastened to do his bidding. When he moved, crowds parted for him. Was it possible to learn such power? She wondered if she could. Children, the three of you. Willow flung up her arms in exasperation, and Cinder realized she'd missed something. Honestly, it's like herding a bunch of cats. Does that make Cinder a kitten then? Naruto positioned poised with a cheeky smile. Willow squawked at him, and he took her elbow with a good grace. Unfortunately for him, Cinder misinterpreted his words. Weak was she? Oh, she'd make him regret that. Sensing an opportunity to show chaos and gain sweet vengeance, she pounced on it in a fit of pique. In a fit of pique. Mock her, would he? Well, she'd show him. Gripping onto him with her legs, she pivoted with her little hips and reared back. A lot of comprehension dawned in Summer's eyes and flashed across Willow's face, but both held their tongues as Cinder bared her teeth, lunged forward, and chomp! Gah! Naruto jumped and let out a yelp as her mouth clamped down on the outer lobe of his left ear. To his credit, he didn't drop her or break his stride beyond that brief flinch. He recovered quickly and turned his head to grant her a look. A lone blue iris flashed out at her, and she realized her mistake. Her temper had gotten the better of her. In a moment now, he'd lash out, strike her, call her a fool, or worse. She expected anger, a rebuke at the very least. Instead, she found only bemused silence. Vicious little thing, aren't you? He said, but his words lacked any sort of heat. So, what was that for? You called me weak. Cinder huffed and gave his hair a yank. I'm not weak. I'll get stronger. Her guardian blinked, but allowed it. When did I say you were weak? Willow sighed as Summer giggled, and Cinder felt her heart flush. Had she made a mistake? But you implied... I didn't mean to. Once again, the whiskered man cut through her anger with that strange, faint smile of his. And even if you think I did, there's nothing wrong with a little weakness. A hand reached back to awkwardly pat her head as best it could. I wasn't born with strength, he added when she began to open her mouth. Everything I have now, I earned. If you work hard, you'll get stronger too. I'll see to that. He paused then and seemed to consider something or someone. Remind me to tell you about a man named Rock Lee. When it comes to hand combat, he was even stronger than me. Her eyes blazed, strong enough to bat red eyes around like a chew toy. Yes, please. Speaking of which, where's Raven? Willow asked, steering the conversation to her safer waters. I thought she'd be hounding us by now. All eyes turned to Summer. She's occupied at the moment. The little huntress laughed and kicked at her heel, a light lilting sound that reminded Cinder of someone she'd rather forget. You've got a few minutes before she cuts a portal to you. As for Crow and Ty, well, she shrugged helplessly as they noted their absence. The boys liked to sleep in. Doesn't help that Raven was extra grouchy last night. Joy of joys, Willow groaned. I don't suppose there's any way to get around that semblance of hers? Nope. Summer smacked her lips in the negative as Cinder listened intently. Believe me, I've tried. Once she sets her sights on you, that's it. Crow tested the limits of her semblance once. He had a bad time. She spun her finger in a quick circle as the unlikely trio balked at her. Negative or otherwise, a bond is a bond. She could reach you halfway around the world if she wanted. Betcha I could outrun her, Naruto shot back. After what I saw yesterday? Probably. Summer hummed her agreement as she skipped a few paces ahead of them. But she'd just make it at the portal when you stopped, and then where would you be? Laughing my ass off. Willow snorted because she could manage to stop her before she could manage to stop herself. It was a very unladylike sound, one muffled against her palm, one that instantly caught Cinder's attention. It served as yet another subtle reminder for her. Little Miss Ice Queen wasn't what she seemed. She liked to play the high mighty Harris, but as Cinder had seen last night, she saw again now. Willow really wasn't all that scary, no matter how she might wish to think otherwise. Cinder knew how to read people. The Schnee wore a mask in the public eye, a masterfully crafted facade that she only lowered when surrounded by friends and family. She was an actress, a very, very, very good actress. Another thought occurred to Cinder. Just then, Nato had promised to train her up. Sure enough, but there were tricks Willow could teach her as well. Tricks he didn't know. Neat. Her stomach snarled at her then, reminding her of the distinct lack of breakfast for the last 5 minutes. Just how long was this hallway? Food, she growled. Now, Nato groaned. Right, then training. Woo. Mind if I join you then? Join you too? Summer hung back to match her pace with his, uncaring of Cinder's glower. It's been a while since I had a good spar. It was like flicking a switch. Cinder squeaked softly as Naruto abruptly shifted his grip on her and boosted her upwards. Somehow he managed to swing her atop his shoulder with his natural arm, forcing her to hold onto his hair for dear life, only to immediately pivot and all but clutch his shinobi prosthetic to his chest. She hadn't been present for yesterday's display, but there could be no denying the look of abject horror on his face as he jumped backwards. It wasn't fear for himself, but fear for something else entirely. Back, he hissed at the huntress. Back, foul creature, back to the pit from which you came. Cinder nearly lost her grip and tumbled from Naruto's shoulders. Summer's reaction was nothing short of explosive. One time! The silver-eyed warrior whined through her teeth and flailed her arms to no avail. I geek out about your bloody arm one time, and you won't let it go. So you're saying you don't want my arm? Naruto pointedly held out his metal limb towards her, like a baited hook waiting for a bite. Not at all. He wiggled it a bit, not even a little. Well, Summer drooled a bit as her fingers twitched towards him. Well, if you're offering, no! She cried out as he yanked it back out of her reach. Wait, you tricked me! I didn't mean it like that. Now that I think on it, you did try to jump him yesterday. Willow tapped her chin with a merciless smile that had the smaller girl wilting like a dying flower. Why, I believe the words "I want that" were uttered. Something deep inside of Cinder physically recoiled at the simple declaration. Little though she may be, she was no fool. Jumping someone meant one of two things. Someone had either tried to shake Naruto, unlikely, or attempted an act of a more intimate nature. The thought left her vaguely ill for reasons she didn't understand, and her hands tightened against his hair. A strange feeling welled up in her chest. She didn't like it, because it felt sharp and angry and painful, and she wanted it to go away. Still, it persisted, clawing and tearing at her heart. Behind her, Summer made a strangled sound that vaguely reminded her of a kicked puppy. Willow, how could you? The Schnee made a show of inspecting her nails very easily and with great relish. You're never going to let me forget this, are you? Cinder glanced back and forth between them, all thoughts of hunger forgotten. No, she decided she didn't like this, not one bit. At the end of the day, for all her fierceness, she was still a child. Willow was one thing, But those last few words had left her with a profound dislike of Summer. That, coupled with her spectacular misunderstanding, only made matters all the worse. Jump him, Willow had said, which meant she was trying to take Naruto away from Willow, from her. No, not allowed. Absolutely not allowed. Not.
Him. Cinder hung her head. Huh? All eyes turned at her at once. I said you can't have him! Her gaze snapped, blazing with fire. He's not yours! Willow made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a guffaw. Naruto wasn't far behind her. Not my... Oh, no. Realization dawned, and Summer's face went possibly scarlet. I'm not trying to take him. Yes, you are. Liar, traitor, trickster, she cried. What's gotten into you? All right. That's enough fighting. Naruto flung up his arms before Cinder could leap at her. No one's taken me anywhere. Cinder stuck out her tongue when she thought he was looking and when he wasn't looking, and he promptly flicked her forehead for it. Summer received the same treatment when she tried the same. Geez, both of you. We'll settle this some other way, all right? There's no need to fight. Don't be such a dolt. Willow settled up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You promised to train with Cinder, remember? And besides, Naruto looked over his shoulder and Cinder focused her most pleading expression on him. Before her very eyes, his resolve became so much jelly. Had she been privy to his thoughts, she might have realized just how potent that expression was. Gods, you could weaponize that level of cuteness. How could anyone stand against it? All right. He flung his gaze away. Geez, twist my arm, why don't you? Thankfully, they reached the dining room in short order before another argument could erupt. Wow, Summer whistled. You guys really do go all out when it comes to food. Maybe I should visit more often. Willow elbowed her, but otherwise didn't challenge that statement. She was right in a sense, though it was much as it had been last night. The delightful aroma wafted from the main table was completely foreign to Cinder. She gasped once again, taken aback by the sheer volume of food before her. If only because she hadn't thought it possible to surpass last night's feast. She'd been wrong. Apparently, the chefs of the Schnee household were determined to outdo themselves for her sake, if nothing else. For a veritable feast lay before her: waffles, pancakes, bacon, and eggs. Oh my, and juice. Actual juice, not at all like the brown murky water she'd been forced to drink down in Mantle. Her stomach growled at the sight of it, and she began to squirm restlessly on Naruto's shoulders, drawing a light laugh from her guardian. Looks good, yeah? He knelt down, and she promptly hopped off his back. Go ahead, pick whatever you like. And she did. Cinder Oppet snatched up a plate and dove at the table, heedless of the pitying eyes at her back. Within moments she heaped it full with pancakes, bits of bacon and eggs. After some consideration, she grabbed a bottle of syrup and drizzled it all over the messy amalgamation she'd made. Only then did she turn to find Naruto, Willow, and even Summer balking at her. Why, had she done something wrong? Did I make a mistake? Suddenly, she felt terribly small beneath their gaze. Is it all right if I eat all this? You poor thing. Willow drew her into a hug, and for once, Cinder didn't resist. Of course it is. And the sooner you eat, the sooner we can go outside, Naruto reassured her. I don't know, Summer hummed. That looks like an awful lot of food. Cinder attacked her plate like a rabid Beowulf. Say what you would about Naruto, but he knew how to motivate people. Willow Schnee, she was feeling particularly motivated at the moment, but for a different reason. At first, she hadn't been quite sure why. She wasn't particularly angry at anyone, Naruto, or even herself, but with time and breakfast, she'd come to a better conclusion, a realization, if you would. It had come to her while she'd watched Cinder devour her meal, even after annihilating her first course. She'd gone back for seconds. Manners aside, she wasn't a wasteful eater. Not a scrap had been spared. That was the problem. Both last night and this morning, Cinder had attacked her food as though it were her last meal. Of course, Willow felt no enmity towards the poor girl. On the contrary, she found herself rather fond of the girl. She was simply angry at the world that made her this way. Destiny, or just blind bloody luck, had saved Cinder from a horrible fate, but if they hadn't pulled her out of the gutter, she'd still be down there, starving, freezing to death, or worse. No child should suffer like that, but the world was an awful place, and even as a Schnee, her influence only reached so far. How many more were suffering even now at this very moment? How then could they change that? How could they make it better? With strength, wealth, fear? No, something more was needed. But what? That dark thought continued to torment her as she led the rest of them out into the garden. Although the Schnee Manor had its own proper grounds. This garden was more of a yard than anything else, concealed behind the main bulk of the building by a mighty green hedge rising on either side. It bore a winding stone path through the grass with various statues and a small water fountain nestled near the center of the enclosure. It was pretty and picturesque and perfect, lovingly maintained by a number of groundskeepers during their tenure with the Schnee family over many years. Something told Willow it wouldn't be intact for much longer, not with the smiles Naruto and Cinder were sporting. Their weapons would play absolute havoc with the yard. She just knew it. Oh, how the landscapers would weep after this. Still, this was her refuge, her haven, her haven. Her quiet place where she could drink and think and be alone with her thoughts. This was the place where everything changed. Only 7 days ago, Naruto had fallen out of the sky here and shattered her world. She was still picking up the pieces. So was he, in a way. She watched him discuss something with Summer and Cinder, and yet, even at this distance, she could see the change that had begun to overtake him. Some of them were more overt than others. He wasn't quite as thin as he used to be. Never mind his arm, but the true alteration lay elsewhere. Her gaze drifted upwards to his hair. Those spiky blonde tresses seemed to lose a little more color every day. Those thick white streaks that nearly overtaken half of his tawny mane. There was clearly something wrong on that front, but for the life of her, she couldn't figure out what. It wasn't as though his hair was falling out either. It was simply losing all semblance of color. At this rate, it would match her own by the end of the year. She wasn't quite sure why the thought pleased her. Still, she watched him like a hawk, quietly curious as to what he intended. You can still fight, right? Until his gaze found hers with a teasing smile. Willow reacted to being teased as befitting of a Schnee. Sable flashed free from her belt and came up under Naruto's chin with perfect poise. He could have dodged or disarmed her any number of ways, and that he didn't spoke much of the trust between them. Unfortunately, it did little to soothe her nerves. If anything, it reminded her of their first meeting. Would you care to repeat that question, good sir? She pursed softly, or do you require a demonstration? Not at all. Naruto laughed, and her frigid anger thawed in its light. In its light, you've more than made your point. I give. He crept up the back of Willow's neck as she lowered her weapon. She knew what Naruto was doing. He was distracting her, doing his best to lighten her mood. He'd succeeded. While her heart didn't exactly feel light at the moment, she felt decidedly better than she had a moment ago. Didn't stop her from kicking his knee, though. Can I learn that, Mom? Cinder poised suddenly. The thing with the saber. That, not the kick. I know that one. What? Willow sputtered in a fit, startled to find herself the undivided focus of the girl's attention. You want me to teach you? Summer cooed softly when Cinder nodded. Naruto clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle his snicker. It was all she could do not to stick them both full of holes. Damn her, damn him, damn them both. Never mind being called a mother by the brothers. She wasn't ready to hear that again. You can learn weapon tricks later, kiddo. Thankfully, it was Naruto who swooped in to save her. For now, let's start with the basics. But I already know those. She balled her hands into fists and stomped a foot. What's the point? Because they'll make 'em better. Summer sidled up to her before she could offer further protest. Trust them. They've got your best interest at heart. For a fleeting instant, Willow wondered if Cinder would tell the silver-eyed warrior to stop off. Incredibly, she relented. Fine, she huffed. As far as ideas went, Willow didn't think this a bad one. While Cinder was certainly tough enough to survive the streets of Mantle, the poor girl clearly wanted more than mere survival. She wanted to thrive, to win, to be the very best, like no one ever was. Naruto seemed inclined to grant her wish for reasons she didn't understand. It was admirable in its own way. For all his bluster, he had a gentle heart, and it was best to start from the ground up when building a solid foundation. Still, this was his idea of training. All right then, Naruto clamped his hands, producing a sharp pop. It would seem our resident birdie won't be joining us today, so let's get started without, shall we? Come here, Cinder. To her credit, the girl didn't need to be told twice. She all but bolted to his side. That's a girl. His hand descended on her head and mused her hair effectively. Now then, first things first, what did you say your semblance was? She scuffed a foot against her heel. It's not a strong one. I'll be the judge of that. Naruto tilted his head. Go on, show me. It's hard to explain, she answered plainly. It's kinda like heat, but it isn't.
Not really. Naruto gestured grandly, and after a moment of hesitation, the youngster reluctantly granted his request. Cinder stretched out a hand and focused upon it, her little face scrunching up with effort, a tiny flame igniting into her palm beneath her gaze. She forced her fingers into a fist around it and glared at it until it crystallized into a glass dagger. It was the first time Willow had actually seen it firsthand. Remarkable. Well, Naruto blinked, somewhat astounded. So you can use fire. Think I've got some ideas. Cinder perked up beneath those words. You don't have chakra, but I'm pretty sure you could use some form of fire jutsu. I've seen quite a few, but they're kinda dangerous. You started without me. Raven burst through a scarlet portal beside him before he could finish, wasted and gasping for air. Hands on her knees, her expression proved nothing short of thunderous, and for a moment, just a moment, Willow considered flinging a glyph at the bloodthirsty girl just to provoke her into a fight. She could probably take her if it came to that. No, she knew she could. Raven was dangerous, but that semblance of hers did her no favors. Not here. Oh, great. Naruto seemed to share her sentiment. Look who decided to join us. Willow sighed. Cinder groaned. What kept you? Summer, as ever, seemed oblivious to their irritation. Ospen, the ex-bandit, spat the name as though it were a curse. He wanted to lecture me again. How did you get away? She shrugged. I threw Ty and Crow at him and ran. Summer's hand smacked against her forehead with an audible crack. Raven, no. Raven, yes. It doesn't matter. She huffed, crossing both arms beneath her breast. You. Me. Naruto feigned an innocent blink when she stabbed a finger at him. Whatever did I do this time? Yes, you. Those blazing bloody eyes locked onto him with frightful intensity. And you know damn well what you did. Tell me your secret. How did you get this strong? Naruto didn't so much as bat an eyelash at her petulant display or her pitiful attempt to cow him. He certainly wasn't flustered by it. Good. He had standards. That knowledge warms Willow more than any words, but she chose not to speak them. For now, instead, she watched his stance, saw it shift from a lazy slouch to determined poise as he squared his shoulders. There is no secret. Subsequently, he rolled them in a slow shrug. I got where I am now by training. Nothing more, nothing less. What kind of training? Raven challenged. Willow saw his smirk and bit back one of her own. She knew full what he was about to say. Pull-ups, sit-ups, and plenty of juice. Yep, somehow she'd expected that. Raven, not so much. Why you? Summer snorted. Cinder joined her, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Omen flew free in a bloody arc, and Naruto danced away when it swung at his throat. His counterattack was vicious and fierce. A single sweep of the legs unbalanced Raven and left her open to a counterattack. Then several somethings found her torso and sent the brash girl sprawling to the grass. There was no transition from one moment to the next. One moment Raven was in the air, the next she found herself eating dirt. Willow blinked. She hadn't even seen those attacks, and there had been more than one at the end there. Connect properly, such as the speed behind them. Had they been punches, kicks, something else altogether she didn't know, and the lack of knowledge frightened her. Well, that was worrying. Not so Cinder. She clapped appreciatively. There's your first lesson. You've got a bad temper. Naruto mused, watching Raven gasp for air. You're even more reckless than me, and that's saying something. Oh, and Summer, yes, the girl in question perked up when he called his name. White caps fluttered in the breeze as she turned to face him. Can we start already? That depends entirely on you. Blue eyes rose to meet Silver, narrowed. No, no molesting my arm. No touching. She pulled a face at him and stuck out her tongue. Boo! Hiss! Spoil sport! Then his gaze turned to Willow. Something in her flinched and she immediately slapped it into oblivion. What was she afraid of? Naruto wasn't a bad person. Skilled perhaps, dangerous certainly, but not to her. No, never her. He had proven himself time and time again, both in Atlas and metal. That display had just startled her. Yes, that was it. Surely it must be. She still enjoyed his company, and her heart fluttered when he smiled at her. And oh dear, he was smiling at her right now. Right then, shaking her unease off with her pale coat, she willed herself to meet his eyes. Shall we begin? Raven growled into the dirt, but nevertheless managed to scrape herself off the grass. Points for effort, she supposed. Fine by me, Naruto shrugged restlessly and began cracking his knuckles. If you want, I'm not a very good teacher, but I guess Cinder's
pleading stare seemed to serrate his soul, and he trailed off in quiet consternation. Summer absolutely squealed. She's just too cute. I'm gonna die. Stop that. He flung up a hand to shield his face. I'm not chickening out. It's just, I don't know. Come at me or something. Willow sputtered. I beg your pardon. I said come at me. Naruto blew out an exaggerated breath when she glared at him. Like I said, I'm not the best teacher, you know. Cinder aside, I can't teach anyone anything until I've got a measure of their skills. He turned aside and scratched at a whiskered cheek, muttering to himself, I mean, that or push you off a cliff, but I don't think that'd be a good idea. Damn it, Jiraiya. You want to fight all of us? Summer pepped up, silver eyes wide. At once? Yeah. Naruto shrugged. Willow could see he meant no malice by it. He simply spoke the truth. Raven he knew how to handle. She challenged him more than enough for him to get a feel for her style, enough to all but knock her into the dirt, certainly. As for Willow herself, he certainly knew hers was somewhat due to their time together. Summer was the only mystery here for him, and he didn't think of her as a threat. Cinder, well, he could build up the foundations of what she already knew, but something told Willow that would be a task in and of itself. She would have known better when Naruto started. She should have known better when Naruto started laughing. I've got it. A fist smacked into his open palm. All four of you work together and try to take me down. Let's avoid using dust, though. I don't want to be blown up. Again, Willow winced once. She messed up once during a spar, and he lived to tease her about it. All right, Summer chirped happily, all for the idea. It's been a while since Willow and I fought together. You're going down, Whiskers. For a fleeting moment, Naruto's smile reminded Willow of a shark. If you say so. Did he truly think he could defeat the three of them together? Never mind little Cinder facing three skilled huntresses, even if she technically wasn't one, as a united force was reckless at best, suicidal at worst, yet that smile never once wavered. Was it confidence or arrogance? Somehow she suspected the former rather than the latter. Raven sulked. I don't need their help. You really do, Cinder snorted. What was that, brat? Naruto didn't make an effort to stop them from squabbling with one another. He simply closed his eyes and exhaled. In hindsight, Willow thought it seemed a silly thing to do. She nearly thought he intended to fight them with a handicap, but no. After what felt like an eternity, he opened them again. When he did, those baby blue irises were nowhere to be seen. Gentle golden orbs gazed out at them with flat pupils framed by orange at the ends, narrowing now in the thinly veiled amusement. What the devil was he up to? What did you just do? She asked. That's a secret, he hummed back. There's something I want to test. Before she could protest, the blonde held up a hand. Everyone ready? Set. Willow realized what was about to happen and hastily scrabbled away from her companion, just in time too, because that hand slammed into the dirt like an explosive. Go! Raven needed no further provocation. She all but flew at him with a snarl. Willow didn't bother to warn her, much less stop her as she reversed course and raced after the huntress. Raven wanted the glory for herself. She wanted to win on her own merits. Fine, she was welcome to try. Naruto wouldn't fall for such cheap tricks, lacking the ability for, or perhaps the empathy to work well with others. She charged at him, cut a portal, and vanished into it. Summer attempted to leap into it after her teammate, only for that swirling scarlet gateway to close right in her face. She landed awkwardly and stumbled. Raven, what the hell? Naruto palmed a brace of sharpened kunai to his right hand from his sleeve and flung them at the startled huntress, forcing her to spin and bat them aside. Cinder launched a shard of molten glass at him, and he slapped it out of the air. In the next moment, he reached a hand over his right shoulder. Not a beat later, Omen's blood-red blade burst out of the air to slash at his exposed throat. It was a vicious attack by all means, one that could have easily opened his throat if he'd been caught unawares. It did not. Instead, he caught the blade in his fist and yanked it hard for the first time that morning, but not the last. Raven Bronwyn yelped in surprise. Wherever she'd been on that other side of the portal, she found herself yanked through by the strength of those arms. Raven's red eyes bored into his blue as she struggled to extricate her weapon from his grasp. To no avail. When she swung at him with her fist, he caught it and wrenched the joint painfully, drawing a snarl from her. Your portals are useful but pointless. If I know they're coming, as for you, he casually swung her around and wiped her body into Willow at breakneck speed, sending them both tumbling to the dirt. That was a nice trick, he shouted back at them, but not enough. I can sense all of you. You'll have to catch me off guard. Whoops! Golden eyes narrowed and he swayed backwards as Summer's scythe swept through the air where his head had been, leaving the light hunters to hurtle harmlessly past. Unexposed, it spoke well of his restraint that a Rasengan didn't follow, nor a storm of clones, nor even another storm of knives. Instead, the blonde merely reached around, grabbed the trail end of her cape, and Summer squeaked, yanked the poor girl off her feet. Then he spun in place. Batter up, folks, Naruto cackled, and away she goes! Willow staggered up and flung Glyph at Summer just as he completed his revolution. Revolution launched her way, narrowly preventing her from hurtling out of the manor proper. Unfortunately, though it did slow her, it didn't stop her from crashing into Raven. Again, both teammates went down in a tangle of limbs. Oh dear, had he knocked them out? She barely had time to pity their plight before a shadow fell over her. A blurry streak of motion burned in the corner of her peripheral vision, bringing with it a sudden breeze. Bugger! Pride screamed at her to stand her ground, but instinct had her vaulting away as the metal fist crashed down against against the space she just vacated. Dirt and dust sprayed against her combat dress and pelted her legs. But rather than retreat further, she performed a quick pirouette and flicked Sable at his face before he could pursue her again. For the first time since they'd engaged, Naruto was the one to retreat. She chased him, forcing the ninja to retreat as Sable saved a silver streak before her until he finally leaped to safety. Golden eyes made ice blue as he rose. You've been practicing? Noticed, have you? She smiled. Among other things, Willow felt her cheeks heat at the compliment, but refused to let it destroy her focus. Adopting a new stance, she drew her rapier before her, raising her right arm level with her shoulder. She bent it at the elbow and gave him a fencer's salute, when he returned with a bow of his own, sparing a glance for Summer and Raven behind her. She saw them stirring. Cinders was nowhere to be seen, likely waiting for her chance to strike. Not that she blamed the girl. Spirits, she really had knocked them out, hadn't he? For someone who lacked aura, Naruto certainly didn't mind the near miss just now either. Let's even the playing field a little, he hummed. You're free to use your dust now, if you like. A harsh clank reached her ears as he deployed a weapon from the base of his arm. Now that she looked at it, the weapon seemed to be bound to the base of the arm via a thin cable of some sort. One he detached with a flick of a wrist. At a glance, she thought it a staff of some sort, but now it was a lance, no, a spear, judging by its tapered tip. She regarded it with a wary eye. Why bother to use one of his weapons now? He'd been picking them apart with nothing but his hands so far. What the devil was he up to? I trust you know how to use that, she asked. I've used the staff before. He gave the slender weapon an easy twirl to further cement his point. Spears can't be that difficult. Just got to stick them with the pointy end, right? Don't worry, I'll be gentle. Don't say it like that. Naruto frowned at her. Like what? I'm just saying I'm going to hold back, you know? Willow sputtered, ears gone a bright pink for all the wrong reasons. Was he coming on to her? No, nonsense. He'd never be so crass. He likely didn't realize what he'd implied. So many things, so many implications. She would have to take him to task over this later, much later. Bad thoughts. Focus, mustering all her willpower. She steeled herself as she watched him settle into a low stance. Knees bent, she placed one foot forward in response, rapier at the ready as a glyph bloomed beneath her feet. She shot forward, and all the world became a whirl of speed. For all her speed, Naruto still struck first, and Willow felt her aura spark angrily at the tip of his spear slid across her cheek. She dove at him, only for her blade to pass beneath his arm as he opened his guard. His spear was merciless, whirling into her ribs with an audible crack. She heard her scroll beep ominously, heralding another plunge. An annoyed hiss fled from her lips, but she bit down against the pain and trapped the weapon against her arching side and slam the butt of her rapier against his nose. Naruto's head snapped back and he grunted, not in surprise. He'd likely let it happen, the bastard, but rather acknowledgement. Good hit, he grunted, taking a step back. Let's see if you can do it again. They collided anew, and there was no more time for thought, only action. Willow fought well. She used every tactic available to her: whirl, parry, dodge, backpedal, tried to entrap him with one of her glyphs as she retreated, attack when the opportunity presented itself, but she couldn't. Block, time and time again. She found herself forced to defend until her arms arched and her calves burned from the strain, but still she fought on. Sable wired and clicked in her grasp, spitting dust at him, blasting him with fireballs, flinging up walls of ice to bar his path, wind to slow him down. No tactic was off limits. She used anything she could think of. She dodged it all, and what he couldn't dodge, he simply barreled through. Finally, she saw an opening and took it. Her rapier lashed out, piercing his spear, flickering under his guard to find his inner thigh. She cried out with triumph, only for its tip to slam against the shield as his arm unfolded to take the blow. Silently, she cursed Arthur Watts once more. Damn scientist, really was too clever by half. Who knew what other functions that limb contained? She'd overheard him talking about a grappling hook only yesterday. For crying out loud, she wouldn't be surprised if the bloody thing could grow legs and walk at this rate. Hey, Naruto grinned over their locked weapons. Watch where you're aiming. I need that. He batted her blade aside and drove his head against hers. This time, Naruto staggered, but Willow staggered, but came back swinging. She knew he was actively handicapping himself here, using a weapon he wasn't familiar with rather than his tried and true fist or that strange glowing cloak she'd seen earlier. That handicap was the only thing keeping her in the fight, even as his speed and strength outmatched all her attempts to stop him. He could have knocked her senseless by now, but he hadn't, and she knew why. He was holding back, not necessarily toying with her, but perhaps sensing her negative emotions. He decided to try and give her a chance to vent. Good, she needed it. As such, his laughter, when it came, surprised her. Hey, you're finally smiling? She was, wasn't she? A fresh rush of adrenaline burned through her veins, followed by a light laugh of her own. Hold still and let me stab you. She'd never been the sort to enjoy combat before. It was something father had forced on her for the sake of her safety, something she had accepted as being necessary. It always seemed a thankless task, but here, now, Widow finally felt alive. She didn't think about Summer or Raven or their curious absence from the battle. She didn't realize they were behind her, observing with slack-jawed faces. She didn't see Cinder watching her and Naruto duel brawl with rapt attention. She didn't care about anyone else. Her mind was focused on a single point, a solitary target, and then, quite suddenly, said target had his spear under her chin. Willow froze, and fresh heat flooded her face as she realized the position Naruto had her in. Sable's tip pressed in against his stomach, unable to break the skin. Even if it did, she doubted the rapier would stop him. Nothing short of a devastating attack or a beheading would slow him down. She, on the other hand, was quite fragile until her aura recovered. He knew it, and so did she. Neither moved. I yield. She lowered her weapon and surrendered in good grace, only to find a captive audience awaiting her gaze. Holy hell, Summer muttered in disbelief. Remind me not to piss you off. Raven glared bloody red daggers at her and said not a word. See, that's what I'm talking about. Naruto came up behind her and slapped her shoulder. You two went down in a couple of hits, but Willow, he gave her a quick hug that did interesting things to her heart. She kept coming even when her aura hit the red. When it comes to a fight, you have to keep your enemy off balance. You need to surprise them, distract them, strike when they least expect. Cinder stepped up and slapped an empty palm against the back of his knee 3 times in rapid succession. Like this? Willow squeaked in surprise. Naruto blinked down at Cinder, having completely lost track of her in the grand melee, which was likely her intent from the beginning. He blinked again, golden eyes fading back to their true blue, as he balked at the girl who, against all odds, had managed to startle him once, twice, thrice. Willow saw the precious moment when surprise bloomed into respect, followed by parental pride. A slow grin crept across his face, one that Cinder even mirrored in her own nervous way. Less so when he swept her up into his arms and crushed her into his chest, chin over her head. Gah! He screamed. That's my girl. No, that is bullshit. Raven squawked and stomped a foot. I can accept the Schnee holding her own after that display, but a child, that doesn't count. Doesn't it though? Naruto retorted with a grim smile as Cinder wrinkled free from his grasp. From his grasp, she bided her time and waited for the right moment to strike while I was distracted. He shook his head. She knew her strengths as well as her weaknesses and took full advantages of them. That's not cheating, that's strategy. He bent down to pat her head, drawing a pleased hum from his charge. Come on now. He only frowned when the rest of them sulked. If she can do it, I know you two can. Even you, Raven. Cinder smirked triumphantly at the hunters in question, snarled at her. Was it wrong for Willow to feel a touch of pride for her ward just now? Just a little. Do I get a reward? Cinder asked suddenly. Willow arched an eyebrow. Sure, she hazarded. What would you like? Her child latched onto her sleeve with fretful intensity. A weapon, like yours. Really? Nato chuckled. You want to use a rapier? Is that a good idea? When Cinder dithered, it was Summer who came to her rescue. Well, she doesn't quite have the reach for a rapier just yet. Maybe something like it would work. Cinder Appa rounded on her, but the cloaked huntress paid her wide eyes no mind. You're still growing after all, so you need something that suits your size, something you can grow into. She paused to thump her chin in a brief fit of thought. A pair of short swords, maybe, she considered, perhaps with a makeshift for ranged functionality, like a bow. Would you like that? Cinder bit her lip. If you think it's a good idea. Better than being unarmed, certainly, though it won't do her much good if she's this weak. Cinder nearly flew at her before Willow managed to tug her backwards. Don't be a bitch, Raven. Summer clicked her tongue. Summer's got the right of it. Naruto shrugged, missing the sudden spark in Cinder's eyes and outright ignoring the sullen scowl Raven shot at his back. I'm sure we can get Watts to make something for you once we're done here. You can give him the specifics later. Still, his lips pulsed when her bright gaze widened with glee. Are you sure that's what you want? More than anything. Cinder nodded rapidly, dark tresses swaying with the motion. Then her gaze found Willow. You'll teach me how to use it, right? Willow practically melted on the spot. Blasted girl. Worse, she didn't think Cinder was even aware of what she was doing. All right, again. Naruto clapped his hands. Who wants to try next? Me. Summer blitzed him with a laugh. Naruto yelped. Hey. Hey. For the first time since they had begun their exercise, Naruto actually yelped in surprise. What the hell? Kurama joined him a moment later. She wasn't that quick a moment ago. Where did this come from? Even with ample forewarning and her close proximity, he made the mistake of underestimating Summer Rose, of lowering his guard in the face of someone he thought to be harmless. It cost him more than he would like to admit. He heard her scythe deploy with an ominous clank, and instinctively stepped backwards to give himself some space with it. But even then, he barely got his prosthetic arm up in time. Summer was fast, not the fastest thing he'd seen in his day, but not by any measure, mind you, but she easily stood in the top 10. Her scythe slammed down against his metal limb, and he felt his shoulder creak pleasantly beneath the weight of her strike as he held her at bay. It wasn't a bad cut either, not by any means. Summer was stronger than someone her size should be. He actually had to put some effort into keeping her at bay in his normal state. It was something of a pleasant surprise. When he cut out at her with his spear, she pivoted against her scythe, planted both feet against his arm, and leaped away in a wild whirl of light. Her feet barely brushed the ground when she was on him again. Credit where it was due, she was very much a master with her weapon. Compared to that, Naruto knew his spear skills were paltry by comparison, but he was still stronger, faster. Summer knew that and sought to take full advantage of his handicap, keeping him in the defensive for as long as she could. Naruto fought back in kind. They fell in a mad melee of whirling strikes and kicks, no rhyme or reason to a single movement, raging across the courtyard like a pair of mad demons. Naruto loved every minute of it, even as they descended into a whirlpool of steel once more. How long had it been since he'd been able to fight like this? It felt good to stretch his muscles again, even in a purely physical capacity like this.
For better or worse, his bout with Willow had gotten his blood up, and now he didn't want to simply teach. This was a simple spar, not a fight to first blood or even to death. They weren't going to stop until someone dropped. You never would have known it by watching the two of them. For all her smiles and silly nature, Summer fought like a woman possessed. Her sight seemed to blur and twist before his very eyes, striking like a viper at his defenses. A viper he beat back time and time again. Anyone else would have been hard pressed to keep up with her. Naruto fought harder, faster, even as he actively held back the lion's share of his strength. Summer skill made him work for it, change things up. Kurama said when he failed to penetrate her defenses for what felt like the umpteenth time. She's gotten overconfident, and it's time we put this through its pace against a proper opponent properly. Having trouble, Summer tittered happily when they crossed blades again. I can slow down if you'd like. Naruto twitched. Cocky was she? That was his line. Funny, he growled back at her. I was just thinking the same. His boot stomped. On her side with an ominous crunch, forcing her to break her clash and bolt before the blade could buckle. With a few practiced flicks of his fingers, Naruto seized the advantage and collapsed his spear into his prosthetic arm in favor of a different weapon. Summer saw the makeshift immediately, and her sight swept down to ring the casing like a gong, jarring all the way up to his very shoulder. Thankfully, his arm held fast. Thank you, Watts. Though his feet dug deep furrows into the ground as he weathered the strike, it would have been easy to lash out there, but he didn't. He chose not to, knowing she'd simply bolt again. Despite himself, Naruto grit his teeth and endured. When he reared up to shove her and her weapon away, she simply bounced off a hedge and closed a gap again. She say what you would about Summer Rose, but she was persistent, recklessly so, and this time to her detriment. Naruto didn't move, even as he saw the white of her eyes, and more, even as he glimpsed his reflection in the bladed edge of her scythe. In the distance, he heard Willow and Cinder cry out. His metal arm snapped upwards. Gotcha! Sparks flew, his cylinders ignited, and the dust barked furiously as a bloody inferno flooded Summer's vision at point-blank range. It struck the cloak huntress dead on. Until it didn't, there was another flash of white light, her semblance, as she twisted her body to the right and swept through the fire and the flames. He heard the crackle of ore as the fire sizzled against her body, yet she didn't take so much as a lick of damage. In an instant, she closed the gap and burst through, heedless of the fading flames licking across her form, semblance or not, and he could only assume this was one that was reckless, even for her. Just how crazy was this girl? That's a new one. She grabbed his flame vent before he could fire again and leaned over it to grin at him. No, not realized at his arm. Her body practically wriggled in place as she gazed at it. Such was her glee. Let's see what else it can do. Jeez. Try as he might, Naruto tried to fight down a grin of his own and failed spectacularly. Willow wasn't kidding. You really are a weapon junkie. You know it, Buster. She twirled away, and when he tried to chase her, she found himself intercepted by Raven's blade and Willow's rapier. Lovely. Now they decided to intervene. Spoil sports, he cried. Quick, he's distracted. Jump in. Naruto didn't even deign to turn and meet Summer's next pass. He simply removed his jacket and flung it over his back when she ambushed him, as he'd known she would. Overcommitted to her headlong rush and unable to adjust her course in time, the agile huntress flew headfirst into the coarse garment. It wrapped right around her startled face and sent her tumbling to the ground. Then, as she fell in the dirt, he pulled the knife and struck her across the head with the hilt before launching it at Raven. Caught in mid-charge, the swordswoman abandoned her ambush and darted aside, only for Willow to close in on him and force him to turn his attention to her once more. He gladly gave himself to the conflict that followed. They carried on like that for a good while. Summer harried him with her speed, while Raven and Willow closed the distance. Every now and again, Cinder would fire off a shot of her own from a distance, though
He simply used the back of a hand to smack those away rather than avoid them. It was rough, it was sloppy, but it was teamwork. Granted, he wasn't actively exerting himself, wasn't using anything more than senjutsu to harden his skin, and while his intuition told him Summer was holding back as well, likely keeping some dangerous tricks in reserve. Willow and Raven gave their all, and it showed. Finally, one of them made a mistake, a weak link in the chain that he immediately seized upon. When Willow came in low with her rapier, he diverted it with his right and saw his opportunity. Rather than let the weapon pass him by, he reached out and seized its thin edge with his right hand. A quick yank ripped it out of her grasp and sent her crashing to the floor. Raven cut out at his extended limb in a blatant attempt to capitalize on his weakness, unaware of the trap he led her into. While he wasn't willing to break Sable, the same couldn't be said of Omen. His left hand seized her weapon not by the blade, but by the hilt, and squeezed down hard. Metal crumpled under his fist as he drew into a smashing knee. Raven folded against the blow just as Summer flashed into existence behind him, to which he threw the butt of his staff into her back, sending her spinning away with a yelp. In a single flowing movement, he struck out with an ankle, hooked the back of her knee, and bore her down the ground. Willow stumbled upright, reaching for her rapier, only to freeze as his boot came down on the blade and kicked it away. Cinder soon realized she was the only one still standing, and only then, out of mercy, no fair. Summer sprawled flat on her back. Rematch! I want a rematch! No more. Willow joined her heartbeat later. Too fast. Raven gurgled breathlessly. Absolutely bastard. Naruto blew out a quick breath, slapped his whiskered cheeks, and straightened his breath. Not a bad workout. Still, he wasn't satisfied with this. He'd only just hit his stride, yet everyone looked a right and proper wreck. Had it really ended that quickly? Round two? They all groaned. He would have said more had he not heard those approaching footsteps in the distance. Miss Willow, a servant called out to them, catching his attention. Your father was looking for naturally, the curious shinobi turned to see just who had called out to them. He immediately regretted that decision. At first, he paid the maid had to be with that kind of outfit. Little heed at all beyond her appearance. He was particularly interested into any of them, and while this one looked vaguely familiar, his mind was still coming down from an adrenaline high, and he wasn't thinking clearly at first. Still, her fondest features were distinctive enough to remember, for a pair of dark rabbit ears jutted out from a curtain of dark auburn hair, and oh dear, a pair of dull brown eyes rose to meet his and widened as she trailed off with ashen emotion that could only be called dread. Her ears drooped when she saw him. You? Do we know her? Kurama frowned. I think we do. It was with a pang of awkward guilt that Naruto found he actually recognized this young woman, though only distantly. This was the same servant he'd seen some days before, back when he had his first breakdown and smashed a hole in his bedroom wall. She'd bolted before and looked fit to do so again now. She took a sharp step back, and her retreat was only forestalled by Willow clambering to her feet. In quick succession, she flagged the maid down, took her aside, and had words with her. Whatever was said between them, well, he tried not to hear it. When Willow came back to him, her face was stony. Father wants a word with you. Alone. Excuse me? As I said, we have more than 3 dozen fawners on our doorstep asking for you. Nicholas arched a bemused brow and reclined behind his desk as Naruto blinked back at him incredulously. They claim to be from the White Fang. I take it this is your doing? Naruto looked left, then he looked right. He pinched himself to make certain he hadn't fallen back asleep. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to be the case. He'd had a bad feeling about this, and thus he left Cinder with a clone, much to the girl's surprise. But these were hardly the words he expected to hear. He nearly expected Osmond to be here as well, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Suspicious. He still didn't quite trust that one. But Nicholas was expecting an answer, and he felt obligated to give one. I may have said something last night, he granted with a grimace, glancing over his shoulder. Many things. Loud things. The head of the Schnee family, kept a tidy office, all things considered, though it was something of a trophy room, complete with a television above a large, roaring fireplace at the eastern wall, framed with all manner of weapons. Some were in varying states of disrepair, while others looked freshly forged.
He hadn't thought Nicholas was the sort to collect them. Naruto took a moment to gather his thoughts as he appreciated them. His desk was bare save for a few papers and a photo of a fierce-looking woman who could only be Willow's mother. He saw the resemblance there in her face, though she wore her smiles far easier than Willow ever had. He somehow doubted such small talk would save him now. I gathered as much. Nicholas favored him with a bemused sigh. You're all over the news. Wait, what? Naruto did a double take. Huh? Is this what's popular? Is this what popularity feels like? Not bad. I'm starting to understand why humans crave it. He hadn't expected to hear that, much less what followed when Nicholas raised a remote control and pressed a single button. Someone recorded your little stunt last night and leaked it to the media. See here, Naruto wasn't unfamiliar when it came to the concept of television. They'd had a rudimentary form of it back in the elemental nations before the war, and it wasn't a stretch to believe Remnant would have something of a similar fashion. He saw himself of a few hours ago in Mantle, eyes harsh and angry as he stood against the mob, Willow tucked protectively against his back. All right, he remembered this. Someone must have gotten him on the scroll and recorded that mess. If you have problems, take them to Atlas. His own words rose back at him. I'll try to help wherever I can. Nicholas let the broadcast continue to play out as he sank into his thoughts. Did he feel any regret over those words? Absolutely not. He'd seen what it was like in Mantle, and while he would have liked to sock whoever thought that stone at Willow, there could be no denying that the folk down there were in a bad way. And Cinder might have died down there if they'd left her in the gutter. If she'd survived the streets, she would have become a monster or something worse. Much worse. He shuddered at the thought. Stop. That wasn't going to happen now. He'd saved her, hadn't he? Shaking the thought away, Naruto willed himself to face the Schnee patriarch once more. I'm not the best when it comes to public speeches, you know. He paused to scratch the back of his head. I just said what came to my mind at the time. That much I can see. I won't say it's a bad move. Nicholas kneeled back in his chair as he thumbed his chin. But I'm afraid you've gone and stirred the pot. I had hoped to bring you into these matters slowly, introduce you to some board members, have the two of you attend a few balls, and the like. He took up a pen and hastily scribbled something onto a paper as he spoke. Willow didn't want to thrust you into the political arena like this. I can't say I blame her. She's already lost family on that front. Small wonder she doesn't want you caught up in it. Yikes, no wonder she'd been angry with him back there. Sorry, don't be. Willow's father waved his words away and continued to write. No doubt your heart was in the right place, and this is as good an introduction as any. Some will rally behind you for this. Others will decry you for bothering with the fondness at all. His beard twitched as he linked his hands, failing to conceal a frown behind them. That's politics for you, I suppose. It doesn't help that some think you're one of them. Many won't like the idea of a Schnee consorting with a fondness. Naruto's jaw clicked open. He snapped it shut. What? No, I'm not. He flung up his arms in exasperation. Why would they think that? I know you aren't, my boy. The elder Schnee soothed his anger with a raised hand, as does Willow. But consider this. Your features, your appearance, the odd nature of your hair losing its color. He granted him a small grimace as the blonde rubbed at his head. People will believe what they wish to believe, as much as I wish it were otherwise. Truth means precious little in this day and age. Many will refuse to see the light unless they are made to believe. Ignorance is bliss, as they say. It shouldn't be that way. Naruto shook his head. People are people. I said I'd help them, so I will. Nicholas beamed back at him. Well said. Now what are you going to do about it? How indeed? An ugly idea reared its head in the back of his mind. It would be simple to drive them off. It would spare him the hassle of all this. Naruto stomped that thought down into oblivion. He'd never forgive himself for going back on his word. Never mind what Willow and Cinder would think. He needed to meet with them. That much was obvious, but he had no idea how to go about it unless maybe that could work. He blinked, frowned, smirked. I have an idea. Do you now? Nicholas hummed his approval and rose from his chair, tapping the pen in his hand against the desk as he did so. Wonderful. I didn't found this company to run others into the ground. Still, I can't deny that you've created an opportunity. I'd like to seize it while we still can. How so? Naruto frowned. I'm glad you asked.
The elder Schnee all but leaped at the chance to explain. We can use this chance to better the lives of the people. Make no mistake, whatever you do today, whatever you say, they will be watching you. Naturally, you'll have my back in this, of course, but you're the one they want to hear from, not me. Oh, blast it! His right hand spasmed suddenly, and the pen slipped from his grasp. Another started to pounce. Are you all right? Nicholas didn't immediately respond. Rather, he slumped back into his chair and forced his pale fingers into a fist. After what felt like an eternity, the tremor ceased. Even then, he didn't relax his hand immediately. Nato felt something twist inside him at the sight. He didn't like seeing others in pain, much less a decent man like this. Tremors weren't something you should ignore. They could become seizures or worse. The man could be ill for all he knew, and he had no way of knowing the truth. I'm sorry you had to see that, my boy. The other Schnee laughed, but this time it sounded brittle, fragile. Call it the legacy of a well-spent youth. Isn't it supposed to be misspent? He asked. Ha! The Schnee chuckled at that. I know what I said. Believe it or not, I was quite the dashing rogue when I was your age. Oh, the tales I could tell. His eyes went dim with the pang of memory, and he pulled himself back from the brink. Now I'm getting old. Rough fingers massaged his fist as he regarded his wrist, his right hand with a rueful air. Not as spry as I used to be. Can't move quite as fast as I'd like to. Can't fight as hard as I used to. It happens to us all. It doesn't matter. The SDC will be in good hands when my time comes. Those spasms didn't look normal. Is there any treatment? Nato did it for a moment, torn between anxiety and hesitation. Nicholas had been a good host to him, no better than a good host. He treated him like family. He deserved better than the frailty that came with old age. Damn it, he wasn't even sure how old he was at all. All that white hair and that grey, bushy beard made it nigh on impossible to discern his true age. Is there anything I can do? Still, he had to ask. Nicholas granted him a bemused smile. Can you turn back the clock? No. Now it was Naruto's turn to flinch. He had many gifts, but that wasn't one of them. And yet, here, he rolled up his sleeve and leaned forward, baring his marked palm to Willow's father. Let me try something. Before the old man could think to protest, he laid his fingers over this clenched fist. It took some effort, but he willed a quiet pulse chakra through his hand. His mark had helped him before in the past. Surely he could do something about this. Anything was better than standing idly by and allowing Willow's father to suffer like this. When nothing happened, he tried again, forcing the chakra to form in his palm and into his patient. Nicholas straightened almost imperceptibly in his chair. Oh, he blinked rapidly. That feels quite nice. You've numbed the pain somewhat. I just treated the symptoms. They both knew wasn't enough. They both knew it wasn't enough, and it made him frown. It's not a cure. There's no cure for old age, son. Nick patted his arm as he withdrew. Worry not, I have no intention of kicking the bucket just yet. After all, and here a twinkle gleamed into those icy blue eyes of his. You and Willow still haven't given me nearly enough grandchildren. His words had Naruto choking on his tongue, but still he barreled onward with a care in the world. Make no mistake, Little Cinder is a fine start, and I absolutely applaud you taking the initiative on that front, but I want at least 2 more. Red, his face was absolutely red. He could barely trust himself to breathe, let alone speak. That was a low blow, old man. Nick chuckled. I'm a businessman. I can be quite pragmatic when I want to be. Which reminds me, if you would indulge this old man a moment more. With a ponderous creak, the Schnee patriarch dragged himself out of his chair and stood, then circled the desk to meet him. Naruto moved to stop him halfway, fearful that he might suffer another attack or worse, but was summarily waved down until he came within range. The moment he did, a gloved hand clamped down on his shoulder with surprising force and drew him close. Naruto allowed it, even as his instincts bristled. Suddenly, the jolly giant was nowhere to be found, his bright smile replaced with an inscrutable expression. I want you to be wary of Ospen. Naruto and Kurama snorted in flawless unison. To be fair, the headmaster hadn't made the best impression on either of them. He didn't seem wicked or even suspicious, but he was just odd. Never mind that they couldn't get a read on his emotions. Never mind that he tried to poach Willow. Never that his smile never quite
seemed to reach his eyes. Even put all that aside, he just couldn't bring himself to feel comfortable around him. It was as if some sixth sense were shrieking at him, telling him the keen wielder was more than he seemed. "You don't have to tell me twice," he grumbled. "There's something off about him." Nicholas shook his head. "Make no mistake, Osmond is a good man and a sworn friend of mine." A bleak look flitted across his and that grizzled beard. He's dedicated his life to preserving peace and keeping the grim at bay. But I wouldn't trust him with my daughter's life, or yours for that matter. Those blue eyes reminded him of a frozen lake now, perilous and deep. He wants to recruit you and Willow both. He made his intentions quite clear to me last night. There was again that strange, nebulous feeling of dread. I'm not interested. I already told him that. Thankfully, neither is Willow. Nicholas patted his shoulder once and stepped back to brace his aching joints against the face of his desk. The world has enough hunters and huntresses for the time being, but this won't be the last you hear of it. He's persistent and charismatic, more than you know. He scowled. If it comes down to that, then I'll deal with him. Will you? Quick as a flash, the dark shadow fled from the Schnee's face. "My dear boy, why do you think you haven't seen Osmond today? Did you think he simply forgot about you and Willow so soon?" Naruto shrugged awkwardly. "He was busy, in a sense, because I've kept him occupied. Paperwork is the bane of all men." A merry twinkle flashed through those icy blue eyes. "But I won't always be there to run interference for you. There are secrets you should know of, dangers of which you aren't aware of yet. But well, if I were to reveal them, it would fix his focus firmly on you. I shouldn't be the one to tell you them." He blew out a sigh and forced himself to stand once more. "I'm not trying to poison you against him, mind you. On the contrary, he's a force of good. But sometimes sacrifices are made for the greater good. What say you to that?" Something in him physically recoiled. "I wouldn't sacrifice my friend for anything." "And if you had no choice?" Nicholas stepped forward in challenge. "What if you couldn't save everyone? What then?" "There's always a choice." Naruto butted his head against his. "I'd find a way to save everyone." Those piercing snowy eyes regarded him for a long moment. You wouldn't, would you?" Nicholas chuckled suddenly, and it sounded a rusty and bitter thing indeed. "I can see it in your eyes. You'll gladly throw yourself into a fire for those important to you. With your skills, it just might be possible. Which brings me to my next question." Those jagged chips of ice turned colder than a ragged blizzard as they focused on him. "I once asked you if you would die for my daughter. Do those words still ring true, even now?" Naruto lifted his chin in mute defiance and dared him to object. "Fair enough." Nicholas relented ruefully. "I can see you haven't wavered. You seem to be staying the course." "What in blazes did that mean?" "Well, color me impressed. The old geezer's scary." Naruto agreed wholeheartedly. Nicholas Schnee wasn't some doddering old businessman as he first suspected. This was a warrior, past his prime perhaps, but still dangerous, very much so. For an old man who claimed to be in his twilight years, he'd moved pretty damn quick just now. This man must have been a monster in his prime. "Now's not the time for this, I suppose." Unaware of their inner argument, Nicholas shook his head and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Perhaps I'm being paranoid. We'll speak on this later. There are more important matters to attend right now than the whims of an old man." "Such as grandchildren?" Naruto groused. That drew a sunny smile from Nicholas. "But of course." "Sir," a servant poked their head inside the room before either could speak again. "They're ready for you." A sudden case of nervousness hit Naruto like a jackhammer, and his legs locked up. Not quite fear, but anxiety all the same. He tried to master it, but it somehow wrinkled through his fingers and took root deep within his heart. By all accounts, the White Fang were a peaceful organization. What if he screwed up? What if he said something that turned them violent? What if he couldn't risk sending a clone either, for fear of any mistakes the doppelganger might make in his stead? Never mind that weird dream. Blast it all, when did everything get so complicated? "Well, time waits for no man, it seems." Nick patted him on the back. "Ready for your crowning moment?" Naruto gulped. "Not really. My boy, you're the hero of the hour," he chortled softly. "Surely you don't intend to hide away in your room for the rest of your life?" "Can I? Please?" "Nay." Nicholas boomed a laugh and swatted him on the shoulder. Out with you! Say what you would about Nicholas Schnee, he was stronger than he looked. That half-hearted swipe slapped Naruto's shoulder, bowled him through the doors, and propelled him forward into the hall. He would have flown a fair bit farther too, if not for a conveniently placed lift catching him in the air. Thank you, Willow, best girl. Another thought occurred to him as he landed. Were you eavesdropping on me? Her eyes flitted away from his. I have no idea what you're talking about. Aha! He sensed a faint trickle of guilt from her, threatened by naked embarrassment. Willow, never mind that. You look awful. She tugged him upright and numbly. He let her fuss at his jacket for a few moments before he registered what was happening to him. Was it really so bad that father threw you out of his office? Crap, the speech he'd forgotten for a moment. One sweet, blissful moment. You gotta help me. He reached out, grasped both her hands like a lifeline, and squeezed them tightly. Please, don't make me do this alone. I don't even know these people. Help with what? He told her. Words spilled out like water. Willow listened, momentarily taken aback but she listened nonetheless. And as Naruto told his tale, her right eye began to twitch in agitation. A muscle jumped in her jaw. By the time he finished, a vein was throbbing in her temple, and she looked fit to strangle him. Really, the word itself was a growl. The White Fang. Why am I not surprised? I don't even know who they are. He flailed. You didn't think to ask father? In hindsight, Naruto knew he really should have. His mind had just been occupied, both with Nicholas and other matters. Should he tell her about the seizure he'd seen? No, that would only hurt her. Ospen, nope. He was another can of worms altogether. But telling her now would only worry her. In the end, he settled for a soft no. Then listen closely. Willow's finger prodded his cheek, earning a rueful smile from him. The White Fang is a faunus organization here in Revenant. When he didn't immediately interrupt, she withdrew her finger and took hold of his hand once more as she continued to explain. They were found following the faunus rights revolution, which I'm sure you know nothing about, given that you've not been told of it. But we'll come back to that at a later date. What matters is what they claim to be: a peaceful activist organization created to improve relations between humans and faunus. Naruto nodded, gesturing for her to continue. Still listening, are we? Good. A dainty smile graced Willow's pale face. Some say they were founded as a symbol of peace and unity, but in truth, they haven't gained much traction in the last few years. They're big on civil rights for their kind, equal pay, boycotts, protests, that sort of thing. And you've attracted their attention. Is that a bad thing? Naruto asked. Willow winced. It depends on your definition of the word. He didn't like the beat of hesitation that followed. You're being evasive. Rightfully so, Willow huffed, crossing both arms before her bosom. I can't call the relationship with my family contentious, but I can't say it's good either, not as things are now. A troubled look flitted through her gaze before she muffled it. Father's been working to ensure that our faunus workers have equal rights and pay like the rest, but the voice of one man can only carry so far. Our board members and shareholders wouldn't dare risk their bottom line, and without outside aid, his attempts have been constantly stiffened. Stammered. She saw where she was going with this, even as she said the words. Until now, Willow agreed, pleased when he caught onto her meaning. What you did down in Matel was unprecedented. Not only did you, someone who looked very much like a faunus, openly defend me, Schnee, against the crowd of malcontents, but you told them to take their issues up with Atlas, with our family, the family you're pretending to be engaged to at the moment. Oh ho, wait, earlier you said our. Now it was Naruto's turn to arch an eyebrow. You heard nothing? Willow sputtered swiftly, reading his words down. Speak not of it. Still, I didn't think you would have trouble with this, she continued, let alone stage fright. Neither did I. Naruto palmed his face. I'd appreciate a little help here. Much to his surprise, Willow's cheeks turned rosy indeed. Yes, well, it would be remiss of me to make you face this alone, she muttered, fingers idly twinging with his. I'd intended to help you out regardless, but She mastered herself and pulled her right hand away, coughing into a fist even as her left stubbornly clung onto his. Do you know what you're going to say to them? When he didn't answer, her brow turned stormy. Tell me you at least have a plan. Yeah, it wasn't a very good plan, but it would work definitely. Hopefully, maybe. Excellent. She approved with a nod. If I'm to help you, we'll need to stand as a united front in this. Naruto looked down, frowned. Is that why you went and got changed while I was talking with your dad? She really was wearing a different outfit now that he noticed. At some point after he'd been ushered into the office, she'd forsaken her favorite attire for a pale white combat dress with black frills and matching ebony stripes. Those dark colors complemented what he wore nicely. Perhaps that was even her intent. A tiny voice in the back of his head preened proudly. Naruto did his best to silence it and rolled himself to meet her eyes and absolutely nothing else as Willow fidgeted before him. Do you like it? Well, yeah. Once again, his tongue turned traitor on him. It suits you. Deceit, disloyalty, duplicity. Is that so? Her lips curled in a subtle smile. Why would I lie? Not again. Willow's pale face turned red, and she narrowly burst into a cloud of steam. Before he could take the words back, her fingers clamped down on his wrist, and she all but dragged him down the main hall. Naruto didn't resist. It didn't take a genius to see where she was taking him, towards the entrance. His ears pricked up, finally aware of the noise beyond, even behind closed doors. Even from this distance, he could hear them, dozens of raised voices asking questions, what he wouldn't give for distraction right about now. And why was Willow so red? Before he could ask why, she slapped the door open, and together they stepped out into the light.
First thing Naruto noticed were the cameras. It was impossible not to notice them. A sharp series of staccato flashes greeted his face the moment he and Willow stepped outside, threatening to drive them blind on the spot. Squinting did Naruto no good. Even closing his eyes and shielding his face with an arm provided only a temporary reprieve from the onslaught. Beside him, he heard Willow whisper something exceedingly unpleasant. Whatever it was, he seconded it. Firm fingers closed around his and squeezed with desperate strength. One he returned faintly, so as to not break her hand. Someone saw it, gasped, and the cameras flashed anew. Nicholas has failed to mention the press, probably intentional on his part. Wily old geezer. Damn paparazzi, Naruto grumbled as they descended the manor steps. I didn't think they'd be here. It's to be expected. Willow's voice rose in his ear, though she didn't dare look at him. Smile for the camera, dear. I am smiling, he growled through the gritted teeth. When her lips brushed his ear, he nearly stumbled. That's a grimace, Naruto. The crowd ate it up and howled for more, made him sick to his stomach. Bunch of voyagers. Bunch of warriors. Willow had steered the importance of pressing a united front, and so they exited the manor together, side by side. Oddly enough, that was his sole comfort in this. If he had to suffer through this press hell, at least he wouldn't be suffering alone. Summer and Raven who had been right to scamper off with their teammates while they could. No doubt the four of them were watching this disaster from inside with great relish. As for Cinder, well, while Naruto very much doubted the poor girl enjoyed being left alone with the clone, he wanted to spare her this. She could be cross with him later, because that was a lot of people. Though the burning flashes and bright spots specking his vision, he counted roughly 36 faunas of varying species assembled before the manor gates. More, if one counted the press. A few entertaining reporters had even scaled the metal boundaries and straddled it. They were the source of the endless clicks that barraged his senses, made him want to knock them down into the sea of bodies below. In the end, he didn't have to do a thing. Willow's scowl was enough to send them scurrying back down. The manor guards did the rest. They reached the gate proper all too soon, and it was here that his resolve threatened to buckle. Not that they'd come within shouting distance. Some of the press tried fielding questions. Even with his superior senses, he could scarcely hear them. He willed himself to ignore them. Deep breaths, kid. Just imagine everyone naked. You're awful. Are you sure about this? Willow murmured. A bit late for second thoughts, isn't it? He sighed, then raised his voice to be heard. Let the White Fang representatives through. We'll talk to the rest of you afterwards. Incredulous, the guards balked at the order. Well, Willow snapped at them. What are you waiting for? Do as he said. There's no need. The gates never opened. Something shifted in Naruto's peripheral vision, and a blur of hazy smoke passed through the metal bars behind, and then past him, buffed by a winter breeze. And there, one moment, gone the next. He almost thought he'd imagined it, and he would have too, had Willow not hissed out a startled breath at his side. He turned around to see what had startled her, and his eyes widened. That smoke he'd seen earlier, it rapidly coalesced into a person now, one who gradually rising from a pointed crotch before them. Well, Kurama whistled. That's certainly something. He most certainly did not imagine the young woman standing before them. Pardon the intrusion. The newcomer sketched a shallow bow as everyone else jerked backwards. I didn't mean to frighten you. Gira sends his regards. She just phased through the gates. Is that a semblance? A trick maybe? Can we learn it? I want that. Naruto blinked. Kurama, we could have knocked down the gates. Don't care. His partner grinned. I want it. You're worse than Summer. With the smoke gone, Naruto found himself face to face with what he tentatively assumed to be a faunus. For a pair of dark, furry ears rested atop her head. They twitched just so as he looked on. Bright amber eyes gazed out at him, framed by ebony locks that tumbled well past her shoulders. Clad in long-sleeved dark tunic with matching pants, she wore nothing in the way of armor, but there could be no mistaking the black blade at her side. She probably knew how to use it. By the look of her, planting one hand on her hip, she flicked a cursory glaze up and down the length of him. Just a glance, little more. So, she hummed, you're the one Sienna's been jabbering about. When she offered him her hand, he took it. Hell of an entrance, and you are Kali Belladonna. Her smile shone brighter than the sun as he clapped her palm in her own. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Sienna's told me quite a bit. I thought you'd be taller. There it was again, that bloody blasted name. An uncomfortable sensation tickled the furthest reaches of Naruto's mind like an old feather duster. Sienna. Had he heard that somewhere before? Yes, no, maybe so. Was it important? Probably wasn't. Except, he felt like it was. Semantics. If it was important, he'd remember it sooner or later, eventually. Hopefully something soon, judging by Willow's frigid glare burning into the back of his skull. Right, Wet Fang. Talks. Focus. I take it you're the representative, he said. For the time being, Kali tilted her head, considering the two of them for a long, piercing moment. You told us to come. Here we are. Let's talk. Willow smiled. It frightened him. She squeezed his hand until he felt the bones begin to creak. Yes, by all means. Let us have a chat. Naruto blew out a sigh. It had been a long morning already. Something told him that the day would prove longer still. Previous. Summer grinned. Don't be a stranger. You. Sienna, don't. Someone shouted and pulled the way up from her and from her entourage, catching his attention. This time he was alarmed to find that he actually recognized this one. Oh dear, Sienna bit his hand. Naruto sighed. Really? And Cinder peeled back the cloth, unable to hide her smile as she finally glimpsed the pair of blades lurking within. Say what you would about Watts, but he knew his craft. It was just as she'd imagined it would be, her own weapon, hers. When she learned how to use it, she'd never be powerless again, and she was determined to learn quickly. She squirmed in place and turned to face her guardian with hopes in her eyes. Can we get started? Already? Aha! A moment of weakness. Pounce! She bit her lower lip and trembled. Please, Daddy. We need a new maiden. I'm thinking about leaving Atlas for a bit. I want to see the world, help people. You know, it doesn't feel right to keep Cinder cooped up like this either. Willow muttered something he didn't quite hear. Naruto frowned, then turned when he heard her pen clatter off her desk and fall to the floor. I didn't catch that. If you're worried about the White Fang, don't be. They're good people for the most part. His smile hurt her more than he could ever know, flickering in the faint light of the evening candles. I've got this. There's nothing to worry about. Believe in me. Believe? Ice blue eyes flashed. You keep saying that. You keep doing everything yourself. You keep getting further and further away from. He blinked at her, and she failed to see the comprehension she so desperately sought there. Was he that blind? I'm sorry. Isn't he? Instead, he apologized, like he always did, without understanding. Did I make you mad? Something about those words set her off, and the dam broke. Willow jerked upright. Understand? She mumbled. I said I don't understand. Willow burst out, nearly slapping him with her braid as she rounded on him. I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. She shook her head with every word, braid thrashing, bitter tears rising to bite at her already damp eyes. I don't understand you. Why must you be this way? Her hands clamped onto his jacket, and she smashed her head against the jacket, all but tethering him in place. Why can't you be selfish for once? Why do you have to constantly throw yourself in harm's way? His chin jutted out at her in defiance. Because it's the right thing to do. Why are you so mad at me? Ugh. Even after all this time, he still didn't understand. You don't nothing. She spun and slammed the door in his face. Are you going to kill me? Sienna snarled. I don't think so, Cinder smiled. You work for me now. She's putting together her own power base. Nicholas sniffed happily. Oh, I'm so proud. End of chapter 6.